Hey everybody, thank you for joining us this day 2 of Connect, and welcome to this session. This one's on building Windows apps using the Universal Windows Platform. So really exciting. I'm Senior Technical Evangelist Jeremy Foster, and joining me are Senior Program Manager Ryan Haining, also Product Marketing Director Cliff Simpkins, and Principal Program Manager Uni Ravindranathan. How are you guys doing today?
Doing all right.
Wow, doing well.
All right, well, this is day 2. We had a lot of information yesterday, day 1 of Connect. Let's start by just getting a little bit of a reaction to that fire hose of information, all of the announcements and all of the data. What do you guys think? In your areas, was there stuff that really affects it? Was some of the stuff that you guys yourself were working on?
Yeah, nothing directly related to my project specifically, but really excited to see just the breadth of open source projects that we're announcing recently.
Yeah.
VS Code is really exciting to see that out there. And then the new Graph API for Office, I think, is really, really exciting.
Yeah, and we've had some sessions on that. What do you think, Cliff?
Oh, it's great. I mean, we're following through on a lot of things that we did initial releases back in the summer. And so the release we put out there with Islandwood, we refreshed a bunch of pages. We refreshed our Windows Developer User Voice site, so getting feedback back in and bringing some additional content in there. And then just what's coming out with TH2, the SDK, and some of the advances we have happening there is just awesome. I mean, it's great seeing Windows getting the release out, the update of IoT Core, just all this stuff is really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was like Dimitri was saying, there's a lot of work we have done, and we actually only showcased a very small fraction of it yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to show some of the things that we could not showcase yesterday, but at the same time, like, not everything is still going to be out there.
Yeah.
But over the next few months, folks should, get a preview of all the things and be able to use them to build some amazing apps.
Do you think it's fair to say that yesterday was, although there was some breadth to the announcements, there was also a lot of depth and filling it in and just kind of completing the story? That was my reaction as a developer. It made me feel good, like I'm more enabled in this new open world.
Yeah, the choices that people have. I mean, not only the demos that Kevin Gallo did, but Amanda Silver followed up with stuff with deploying to the band, the Apple Watch, Cordova. It's great how many options developers have.
Yeah, it's kind of becoming ubiquitous that it's going to support all these platforms.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've got so much that we could talk about now in this session on Windows and building Windows apps, UWP apps, and just kind of defining that and filling out some of the scenarios there. We're going to demo 2 things. We just kind of cherry-picked these 2 things, and you guys are going to step up there and give some demos for the crowd. And then we're going to take a whole bunch of questions. So you guys know who these folks are up on stage. So you know what kinds of questions that you can ask them. So make sure you send those questions in. Uni, why don't you go ahead and set up on the demo stage. And Uni is going to show us Continuum and the use of Continuum in Windows apps.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. I'm actually going to show a couple of things. Of course, like you say, we'll kick it off, but just a quick tour of Universal Windows apps and what we have done in Visual Studio to make it possible for you to build amazing experiences that span all devices. Like you say, let's focus, just to drill a little bit, double click a little bit into the Continuum experience and how you could use Blend for Visual Studio to build user experiences that are tailored for the right device. Now, the thing about the Continuum experience generally is it is actually a phone that's essentially projecting the app to an external display. It is not a PC app that just is running on an external display. So when developers want to think about how they build such an app, they have to make a couple of small adjustments to make that work. And I'm going to show that to you here. So over here, like Kevin Gallo was showing yesterday, we have that patient application. I think it's a health monitoring application. I've opened a particular XAML file from that particular application. It's showing appointments for that particular view. By default, when you bring up the designer, we show you like a form factor that we pick arbitrarily. In this case, it's the phone form factor. And let's go ahead and make a couple of changes. So the very first thing is I want to see how this particular experience looks like if I was to project this to a larger display. All I have to do is use the designer dropdown over here and just switch over to, let's say, a different form factor. In this case, let's pick a 23-inch TV or a desktop for that matter. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is when I made that change, the states panel in Blend was smart enough to realize that I'm targeting a new form factor. And it went ahead and automatically pinned the state that corresponded to the particular view. I'll show you the XAML in a second, but what's important here is you see this little eyeball sign. We have automatically detected that you've changed your form factor, and we have activated a state, which in this case we have called tablet for the lack of a better word. We could give it any name we want, and we have pinned that so you can preview that and design for that form factor. What's really going on behind the scenes is if I look at the XAML, all it is states and adaptive triggers. So if I scroll down a little bit here, there is a state that I've defined. I've called it the phone state. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I can call it anything I want. But what's important is it gets activated at a particular snap point, in this case 320 pixels. And there are a few of those defined in there. As I scroll around the different states over here, you'll see those in practice. But what really is happening is when I switched on the particular drop down over here, it activated and made it possible for me to view the designer in that particular state and design for that form factor. Let's go ahead and make another change. Let's go ahead and pick, let's say, an 8-inch tablet over here. And when I do that, you'll see that like a different state gets pinned as opposed to, let's say, a full HD display like a desktop scenario. So we made it really easy for people to think about form factors and how they design for their user experiences for that form factor inside Blend for Visual Studio.
Now I've got a question for you, Uni. Do I, as the developer, need to worry about the difference between a phone that's plugged into, say, a 19-inch monitor versus a tablet that has a 19-inch monitor plugged into it?
Yeah, the experience that I showed you, you don't really need to, because all you're thinking about is screen sizes here.
Okay.
There are other ways to sort of adapt your user experience. So for example, you could choose to load a XAML file that is specific to the device family. So you could say, I want, let's say foo.desktop.xaml when I'm running in my desktop and mobile. That won't work really well in Continuum because it is a mobile device that's projecting to a display.
Right.
So really, if you want to think about Continuum, while you could choose to go that route, a more common approach would be just adapting your user experience to a different form factor using...
Which is what we want anyway. We want more unified development. We want one XAML file for all the different screens.
Yeah, absolutely. There are use cases where you want radically different experiences. Let's say on the Xbox, that's fine, in which case you could choose to load a view specific to that device. But in this particular case, it's just minor adjustments I'm making across form factors, and states and adapter triggers is helping me get there.
Excellent.
All right, so I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to show you an experience that we have never shown before. Kevin referred to this in yesterday's keynote. It's XAML Edit and Continue. It allows me to make changes to my XAML as my application is running, and lets me see those changes in real time. Wow. So let's take a look. In this case, I'm going to use a WPF application just because it's a really early preview. By the way, you'll not be able to, if you download Visual Studio 2015 Update 1, you'll not see this in action. It's still sort of like a hidden feature. We'll bring it to you in a future update of Visual Studio. So I'm going to show you a preview of that, something that's not available right now. So let's go ahead and run this application. In Visual Studio 2015, we added, if you're familiar with HTML development, similar to the F12 tools, we added the notion of a live visual tree and live properties explorer that lets you see the visual tree of your application as it's running and the properties for different elements. So I'm going to kick off this experience by using it and then slowly move on to sort of making some changes to the application. So I'm going to use this tool that I've selected here that lets me select elements in my running application. So let's go ahead and switch to the application. And I want to make a couple of tweaks to this application without actually rebuilding and restarting my whole edit debug workflow. So I want to change the string over here from next appointments to appointments. Just like you would do in Visual 2015, you would just select the thing, and we would synchronize the selection back to your visual tree. Over here is a small icon that lets us identify where the particular source is located at. If I click on this particular icon, you'll see Visual Studio takes me to the exact line of XAML, and it could be coming from anywhere. It could be a resource dictionary. It could be a template. We take you to right where the XAML is at, and I can start making changes. In Visual Studio 2015, the way you would make the changes is through the Live Properties Explorer. And as I make the changes, they get impacted to the running application, but my XAML doesn't really change. We wanted to turn the workflow around to be even more productive. Now what I can do is I can just go ahead to my text editor, which is fully unlocked and lets me make any kind of change that I want. And I'm going to make some changes. So let's go ahead and change appointments to next appointments. That's all I did. If I go back to my running application, you'll see that the text has now updated to the change that I just made.
Now, what if the value of that property was dynamically, like let's say it was bound or something?
Yeah, you could, like for example, I think the scenario plays really well with C# edit and continue. You go change your code. C# edit and continue is of course one of Visual Studio's killer features in my opinion. It kind of plays very well. We can change your C# code, go back to your XAML, change your binding, and so on and so forth. We are a little early for all of those scenarios to work, but when you're done, you can pretty much change anything in your XAML. So let's go ahead and make a couple more changes. I'm going to go ahead and change the font size of this particular element. And I have to be really careful because these are preview bits. I get full IntelliSense. I can change this to 22, or to make it a little bit more obvious, let's make it 32. I go to the running application, and you can see that it's changed. It's getting clipped, which is not what I want. So I can go back to my row definition here, which is unfortunately setting a static height, make it auto, go back to my running application, and now it's changed, right? All of that is well and good. But here's some, and just to show you, like this is really the XAML that you're changing. If I go and rebuild and rerun this application, all of these changes should reapply. Let's just give it a second. And you'll see the user experience change as we have run this application. But because you changed your XAML and Visual Studio stores all of them in the undo stack, you can just undo all your changes back all the way and go back to the running application and it'll revert back to the original state without you actually changing.
Even though that was done in the live editor, you're still in the standard editing experience able to undo those changes. Interesting.
So that's Visual Studio 2015 Update 1, or something that's coming up in the very near future. And we hope with these changes, we make it possible for people to be even more productive building universal Windows apps.
That's great. That's great. Okay. Well, are you finished?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and bring Ryan up? We've got one more experience that we want to show in demo form for everybody, and that is around the inclusion of iOS using Project Islandwood. So I don't want to spoil his thunder, though.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Let's just this one.
All right, so while that's coming up, I'll talk a little bit about what Project Islandwood is exactly, also known as the Windows Bridge for iOS. And basically, it's an SDK that lets you run Objective-C code natively on Windows. So you kind of think of it as, instead of choosing to write your application in C#, you can now choose to use Objective-C if that's the platform that you're already familiar with. In addition to the language support, we also have a set of a compatibility layer for iOS APIs. So if you happen to have an existing iOS application and you're calling into UIKit or Core Foundation and things like that, that same code will still work. So what we've done is the Objective-C compiler and runtime executes, and then it calls you call the APIs for iOS, and we've translated those down into native Windows APIs. And so everything renders properly. And then also part of the SDKs, we have a set of tools that we've built into Visual Studio that allow you to import your Xcode projects directly into Visual Studio and create Visual Studio solutions. And it connects up all the Islandwood code that you need in order to use like the Clang compiler that we get for the Objective-C code generation. And then also it has debugging support. So you can set breakpoints and debug your code and look at variables and even use IntelliSense.
Wow.
So with that, I'm going to show a demo here that is something that we call Walk Catalog. And basically what this is a sample app that actually was built originally using Xcode, and we call into various UIKit controls. So the basics of this application is a UI table view controller, which anybody that does iOS development would be very familiar with. So I'm just going to run this here. So this code runs on iOS, and here it is running as a Windows application on the desktop. And each one of these controls map directly to an iOS control. So if we kind of scroll down and look at some of these, you can look at like the collection view. This is a typical iOS control that lets you put images or any other type of collection item, and we can click on those, and you can even tap and zoom and go back. And you can remember, all of this is running Objective-C calling UIKit. So these aren't XAML controls. This isn't Windows code. We're not rendering this. This is all UIKit. And then another one that's kind of interesting is like native alerts. What we've done is we've taken the iOS concepts, but we've actually mapped them to make them look a little bit better on a Windows application. So it still feels more like a Windows app, but that code is still the same. So you see this kind of looks more like a native Windows control than an actual iOS control. So we have all of these different alert types.
And you're using a mouse.
And I'm using a mouse. I could use touch if I wanted. But another thing that we did is we took it sort of a step further. And one of the interesting things is we can actually put XAML controls directly inside as a child of a UI view control. So one of the demos that we have here built inside, if I can find it, is XAML control. So what this view is a UI table view controller. That's an iOS construct. But each one of these controls on here are actually native XAML controls. So we have a media element, we have a slider, a date time picker. Right? So these are actual native elements running inside as children of a UI view. So this is really useful because this is an ongoing project that we're building, and it is open source, and not every UI kit control is currently covered. And so if you were wanting to build or bring your application over, and we happen to have a control, or you had a control that we haven't built support yet for, you could actually map that in using a XAML control. And I'll kind of show you how that's done. So if I close this and go back and look at the code here, you can see here we have Objective-C. This will look very familiar to anyone. And in the self-row index path, this is the sort of typical entry point for the table view controller to say, hey, now go ahead and put your content inside here. And so what we've done in a very iOS fashion is we have a UI view that we initialize, and then we, instead of saying set child view, we say set native element, and that sets a date picker. Right? So it's a very similar construct to anybody that's used to that, except now you're actually putting in a XAML control instead of an iOS control.
And I imagine this would work well to facilitate a two-team development workflow where some of the people are iOS developers, and they're going to work on these containing UI features, and then they're going to say, do what you want with your XAML on the inside. I don't touch that stuff.
Yeah, and one of the nice things about it too is that it lets you target Windows-specific features that maybe you don't have available on iOS. So some of the things with this, not just the XAML controls, but we've mapped everything as part of the Universal Windows Platform API set. So we have extensions built directly in. So you can call native Windows APIs directly from Objective-C. So if you wanted to have support for live tiles, you wanted to have support for Cortana, you can do that all built in with Objective-C. The other thing that we've done with this too is, if I show you really quick, is we've open sourced this. We've talked about that a lot, and as part of that effort, we recently launched a new website to sort of help get everybody familiar with the project and how to contribute to it. And one of the things that we've done on here is we recently added an IPA analysis tool, and what this does is gives you the ability to submit your application and have it analyzed to see how compatible it would be with the current state.
So can you explain what an IPA is?
Yeah, so the IPA is the sort of like the AppX equivalent in the iOS world.
Okay.
Right, so it's their application package. And so on this page, what you're seeing is the ability for you to fill out this form, submit your IPA, and then what we'll do is analyze that. And basically what we're doing is we're looking at what kits and classes that you're using. We can't see your actual code. We don't see the function level details or things like that, but we can get a general idea of what your application is using, and we use that information to help prioritize which features we're going to go after next.
I see.
So this is an ongoing project, and so we definitely want to target the features that the majority of customers are using and get that out faster. So this tool lets you do that. And in the coming weeks, we'll have it so that you can actually see the breakdown. And right now, what we're doing is collecting all of that to help build our roadmap out, which we'll be publishing in a few weeks as well. So, if people could see that and go submit their IPAs, that would be enormously helpful for us. And then also on top of that, it is open source. It's on GitHub. So people could go check that out, submit issues, they could contribute back. If there's a feature area that's missing that they need for their particular application, they can go implement that and submit it, and we review those every week. And so, we've had a number of customers that have actually done that. They're looking at this project and they're using it to make Windows applications based on, say, an iOS game that they may have written, and they find a piece that's missing, and they've gone and went and implemented that and submitted that, and we've code reviewed and worked with them directly and got that back into the project. So it's really exciting to see the community engagement that's there. You know, our team's on GitHub and Stack Overflow all the time answering questions. So it definitely it's a good resource for people to take a look at and actively contribute.
How does a developer find this form for submitting their IPAs?
So this is on the Windows developer blog site. So we released a blog post yesterday that highlights kind of where we're at with the project, things that we've done recently, where we're going, and there's a link directly to this page for the IPA analysis.
Okay, so search for the Windows developer blog?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It'll be on there.
Wonderful.
You can also go to dev.windows.com,
Okay.
whack bridges, whack iOS.
There you go.
Perfect.
Now you know. All right, well, why don't you come back and we'll answer some questions from the audience. This is all about you guys. We want to make sure that we're delivering the content that's the most helpful for you. So you can let us know by simply submitting questions. First off, Elton asks, are iOS Bridge apps the same as Universal Windows apps?
Yeah, it's a great question. They absolutely are. So anything that you could do in a Universal Windows platform application, you could do with Islandwood. So Islandwood is basically an SDK. You know, so you imagine if you chose to write your app in C#, you would need the .NET runtime and things like that. For Objective-C, you need Islandwood in order to run that. But it's a universal Windows app. You can submit it to the store just like you would everything else. It's not treated any differently, so you have all the same functions that you would.
So this means that I'm able to target huge screens, phone screens.
Absolutely.
This
All
is
of
the
that.
beauty of the Clang, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that's come out of DevDiv, the Visual Studio team,
Right.
supports compiling that Objective-C code right in a native code. And
Yeah.
so that's an AppX, it runs on one core, it is everything that a
Yeah.
UWP is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Let's throw one down to Uni. Is there a difference between using, I'm sorry, wrong question here. Do I need to do any additional work to support Continuum in my UWP app?
Like we talked before, not really. Like, I mean, if you make the smart choices up front, and, you know, like we tend to think of the world as different stages of, you know, what you want. Like, by default, our controls do the right thing. If you did nothing and just use the controls for the most part, you'll get it for free. You could choose to make small user experience tweaks using states and triggers and activate the right states and triggers when you sort of like move your app to that right form factor. And like we discussed, you can have radically different user experiences that you can load up on the right device. We hope for the most part Continuum just is natural to the way people think about universal apps. You have to think about how you resize your application on the desktop, which is essentially a phone at the end of the day, or how do you stretch up your app that runs on the phone on a large screen, which essentially is a PC at the end of the day from a form factor's perspective.
Now, what if a user already has a UWP app where they were targeting the phone platform, pretty much expecting this certain screen size, and then they plug it in with Continuum to a gigantic monitor, but they haven't done anything to their app to change it?
The app will work, of course. It'll of course get more real estate. On the phone, you sort of have views that sort of like, you know, it's one view that's mainly visible, and then you switch out different views.
Okay.
So you will get an experience. It may not be the best experience, so you'll have to think about it a little bit. But yeah, it'll work without you doing anything at all.
So if I have UI controls that were programmatically going to snap to 100%, their 100% is now suddenly a much.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the PC and the ability of the window to resize down,
right.
That's sort of your worst case scenario.
Yeah, right.
The rest of that is just using that and making the smart choices and not hard coding to a phone or a PC.
Yeah.
Though you're absolutely, if you just care about it being a phone app, that's fine. Like, you can build one of those. It's up to you. But, you know, if you think about the PC case and resizing windows, you kind of hit most of the cases there.
Now, on a related note, Brandon is asking, will Continuum work with more than one external display?
I think so first of all, Continuum as demoed was using an HDMI or a USB-C output. So it's a single display for now. You of course you can do wireless displays where you can, without using an HDMI output, you can directly project to a Miracast enabled receiver, I guess. But it is just single display for now. The second display is of course the auxiliary phone display. The output display is for now the main one.
Yeah. Bill Walters asking, how does a person approach moving a large, complicated existing Windows application to a UWP? So kind of a migration story. UWP is the new platform. How does a person get there when they already have a big code base?
I think for the most part, the Universal Windows Platform takes its roots from Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8.1. So most of course, we hope every API that was there on those devices is also available in the Universal Windows Platform. Now, it may not be available in every device family, but it certainly is available on the device family that the app came from. So for the most part, the API should all be there. It's just a question of thinking about what the dependencies are. If you're using libraries that are sort of hard-coded to just work on phone, if they're built with the Windows Phone mindset in mind, it may not work as well when you bring them onwards to the Universal Windows Platform.
Yeah, there may be some logic items. Like the logic definitely translates, and at the end of the day, it's C# or VB, right? I mean, so for WinForms to UWP, it's pretty straightforward. But if you're opening files and interacting with things, namespaces are different, APIs are different, but like the logic's basically the same. It's mostly, I want to channel Peter Torr here, right? You take it, you recompile it, and you go by errors, 1, 2, 3, 4. But generally, would it be fair to say that it's similar going WinForms to WPF, right? Because you still have that WinForms to
I think it's a lot more
XAML?
straightforward than that, in my opinion. Like, I mean, we have seen a number of people who essentially take their existing 8.1 code base, they add a Universal Windows
This
Platform.
is from WinForms. So the question is going from WinForms.
Oh, I thought it's Windows 8.1. Is it?
I thought it was
Well,
WinForms.
no, I think it's probably more of a legacy. I think we can assume something more like Windows Forms.
Yeah.
But there's a good-
WPF is of course a closer cousin.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, WinForms it's going to be similar to effort for as it takes to move a WinForms app to WPF.
Yeah. So in other words, one large part of the story is the fact that you're moving from one UI framework, or maybe the lack of one, into a framework like WPF or Windows 10, where you have a UI language.
Sorry, I missed. Like Cliff is right. For that, it's portable class libraries. You can
Yeah.
share most of your C# code by refactoring into a library that gets reused across your desktop app and your Universal Windows app. So code sharing is, of course, going to get you quite a ways away. But from there on out, you have to really think about XAML and creating good user experiences and things like that.
And that being said, like we showed off at Build, what we're calling Project Centennial. So this idea of being able to take your existing classic Windows platform apps, so whether it's Win32, COM, WPF, WinForms, and very easily repackaging that and bringing that into basically the Universal Windows Platform package, the isolation model, and all the promises that come along with that. And they're showing off the initial vision for that at Build. And I think it's like this next year, we're going to have more information on technical details and when that's actually happening and how.
Okay. Alex is asking what the difference is between a Windows 8 package and a Windows 10 package.
Yeah, that's the question I was trying to
I
accidentally answer. For the most part,
You were cheating.
yeah, the WinForms one is a little bit more tricky question. But yeah, for the most part, if you have an 8 app, it's pretty simple to just add a Universal Windows Platform head.
Yeah.
You could choose to share XAML, and
Yeah.
XAML is of course a superset in Windows 10. But you could also choose to sort of like just move your code, share your code, and then have your Universal Windows Platform head that knows how to sort of optimize or render correctly in different form factors.
Right. Now we've got a lot of questions coming in about the Continuum experience. I think this is going to be a really integral part of people's lives, and they imagine themselves plugging their phone in and using this in their daily workflows. So this is encouraging to see the questions come in. Christian is wondering, when I plug this in, my mobile experience, my mobile interface is replaced with the desktop interface. Is it possible to see both of those at the same time? Both
Absolutely.
the mobile and the desktop.
Yeah, so when you plug it into the dock or use the wireless, I think it's Miracast. I haven't seen the wireless piece. I know definitely the dock. You actually launch into the Continuum experience, and then the phone looks like a sort of mouse trackpad. But you can answer phones, you can work with SMS or whatever on the phone, even while you still have your desktop experience going on.
Okay. What about the developer's app? Can it show up on the phone?
I think with some extra effort you can get there. I'm not sure if that's in the first iteration of the platform.
I haven't seen it yet.
But for example, even in Windows today, you can have views. You can essentially have two views of the same application on two different monitors.
Yeah.
I like to think of this as an extension of that model for the most part. So yeah, for the most common experience is you sort of use your external display, project the app to it, and use your phone as an augmented like input device.
Yeah.
But you could choose. I believe you can also sort of create a view with extra effort on your phone as well.
Yeah, but I'd say probably in the short term, someone should probably aim for the simple case and assume that they're on one screen or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, that would probably be good. One more kind of in the same vein. Yesterday and actually today again, you showed the edit and continue. Can you restate what's the current state of that project and how are people able to use it right now?
No, if you're using Visual Studio Update 1, some of the code is there. It's just not exposed to the developer.
I see.
We would love to get feedback from you in a CTP of the next update of Visual Studio, and be sure to talk loudly when that's ready.
Yeah.
But we would love your feedback when that's the case.
Right. Awesome. Okay, now let's switch just a little bit, and we'll be able to bounce back and forth with these questions. So feel free to keep asking questions on both of the topics that we showed, and really on any topics related to Windows development. But on the topic of the iOS bridge. Ruben is wondering, can I use this on a Mac by using Visual Studio Code? Because we know that Visual Studio Code runs on a Mac.
Sure, it's a common question actually. Islandwood is actually, you're building universal Windows apps, and so that requires the Windows SDK. So in order to actually build those, you need to be running Windows. So you can't run using Visual Studio Code on a Mac, but you could absolutely run Windows inside of Parallels or some other VMware, some other technology like that that allows you to run Visual Studio that has the Windows SDK installed and build that way. And we're actually going to be publishing some sample VMs coming up in the next couple weeks that will allow people to just quickly download those, have Visual Studio already installed, have the iOS or the Islandwood SDK installed, and they can sample, try it out, and use their apps and see if it works that way. But within VS Code, unfortunately, not currently.
Yeah. It's kind of a different kind of development, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Dustin's asking something that I believe we answered on the demo. That is, can a developer call into native Windows APIs from their Objective-C code?
Yes, absolutely. So we have the projections for all the Universal Windows Platform APIs, and you call into them just using Objective-C syntax, just like you would any other API.
That is so cool.
Yes,
just
it is really cool.
And putting the XAML elements inside of the Apple UI, that's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time that I saw that, and I was just, a big smile came on my face. I was like, how did you guys get this to work? I mean, it's really amazing.
Can do. Like all of a sudden you go, whatever UI I'm trying to make happen, whatever combination of Apple concepts and Windows concepts I'm trying to composite on this screen, I feel like I'm going to be able to do that.
There's so many really subtle things that the iOS Bridge team is doing. Yeah. Like it really enables an iOS and Objective-C coder to bring their code over, their UI, their code, and really supplement it with Windows if they want to, or leave as much of it intact as possible, right? And you also get to a world similar to portable class libraries, where you can leave a large portion of your Objective-C code alone in a package that is shared between your Windows app and your iOS app. And that's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's great. I mean, it allows you to separate those, like the Windows feature specifically. Like you can have, maybe you have a live tile, or you want to do notifications that are Windows specific, and you can keep that code separately, and still have all your Objective-C code that still runs your iOS app. So for your build system and things like that, it just makes it really easy to manage.
You'll be inspiring all kinds of envy because they'll see that you're coding in Visual Studio and you're like, wow, that looks cool.
Yeah, exactly.
That looks like a lot of fun. Yeah. Malcolm's wondering about the debug story for this. Am I going to be able to debug into Objective-C?
Absolutely. So we have support currently. If you download the SDK and you build it, it creates a Visual Studio plugin that lets you have IntelliSense and also debugability. So you can set breakpoints. You can step through your code that way. You're able to analyze variables and look at the output just like you would any other application.
Wow. So we saw that in a variety of languages. I feel like in the last couple of sessions, we saw that in C++ and in Java. We know that we've got really good support in Node, obviously in all of our own languages, and Objective-C. This is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
We've got a few questions back on the UWP and Windows apps in general. First of all, how does this is Bill asking, how do WPF apps relate to UWP apps? And can WP apps get into the store?
I mean, I believe Cliff answered that question. Eventually, when we get Project Centennial support in the store, you'd be able to take your existing WPF application, repackage that into an AppX. For the most part, we really hope You don't have to change a lot of your code. We'll respect your investments. It'll run in this as an app that's downloaded from the store. You get all the benefits of the store, so your apps are always up to date if the developer wants to publish an update. You get access to monetization capabilities from the store and so things like that, if you want to use them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a WPF application that's running from the store.
Yeah, and we hope as people think about WPF, I mean, the Universal Windows platform is really an evolution of WPF. I kind of think of WPF as XAML v1.
Yeah.
Right, and you've got UWP as sort of XAML v3. If you're using XAML, right, you can use a variety of UI frameworks to do an app. But in that regard, if you just care about desktop and you don't want to make that much changes to your code, hopefully Centennial will provide a very easy path forward. But if you're thinking about multiple form factors, if you're thinking about sort of the Surface Hub, if you're thinking about mobile, looking at what it takes to take that WPF application to UWP might be a really good time to take the investment rather than waiting.
Jen is actually wondering when Centennial is coming. Is that something that we have any?
I think the current plan is in the coming year, so 2016.
Okay.
Likely when we go for the next round of announcements, it'll probably come in there. We've got the vision. A lot of folks are working on it. It's just a matter of getting the details and getting a release item. There's a lot of items, a lot of work that has to happen inside of Windows as well as tooling. And so it's just the laws of physics in building and shipping a product.
Right. And is it being developed in the open like iOS Bridge?
I mean, Centennial ultimately is a packaging thing. So most of the tools are going to be in the SDK, so to speak. We really hope people don't have to change their code significantly, and there isn't a lot of libraries that you have to add and changes that you have to make. So for the most part, it is an SDK VS type of packaged product that you download, and then just wrap your your Win32 application of any kind, WPF or WinForms or C++, into an AppX package and upload to the store.
Okay. Sort of on that topic, Brandon's wondering, are UWP SDKs, so if this Windows 10 SDK is updated, are those updates tied to Windows 10 updates, or are those tied to Visual Studio updates, or how do we get the new SDK bits?
We have done a lot of work in Visual Studio to allow Windows to run their flights that they do for the insiders. So if anybody gets a flight of Windows that's beyond what's officially supported by the team, they could download a matching SDK and use any version of Visual Studio to go target that SDK. The way we think about it is Visual Studio will hopefully make functionality better over time, but just to call into an API, you just need the SDK. You don't really need anything from Visual Studio outside of what we already have out there.
All right.
Yeah, I think right now we are, when an insider flight happens, our goal is to release an insider flight of the SDK as well. And so SDK is a very interesting thing in the world of Windows, because you kind of have, everybody commonly thinks of the SDK as just the tooling and everything else. In the Windows world, going back to what, 20 years ago? The history of Windows, the SDK is your header files, all of your command line arguments, everything you need to build a Windows application, but doesn't include the Visual Studio tooling, right? And so you have with the insider flights, at this point I think we release an insider flight of the standalone Windows SDK, so all those header files, all those bits, all those command line arguments, as well as updated emulators has been what we've been doing so far. And then as the Visual Studio tools evolve in the updates, you update CTPs, update releases, that's when those tooling aspects come in. But you can install the standalone SDK side by side, so you can have the RTM version of Visual Studio and the Windows SDK that goes with that, but also install an insider flight. And then in Visual Studio you can say, I'm targeting this insider flight, or I'm targeting what I want to release in the store. And if somebody, we've been releasing the release notes whenever we publish an insider flight on the blog, which is blogs.windows.com, whack building apps. So someone can see a difference in the APIs, what's happening there. But I believe Visual Studio flags any API changes that you're targeting in an insider flight that's not RTM. So we try and prevent you from sending up to the store that users may see. Interim or experimental APIs. I think we're doing
that's true. Like a common question I get is, what are the guardrails I get? I get these downloads of flights and SDKs and Visual Studio. And my answer to that is simple. If you see a flag in Visual Studio, one of those notifications that pops up, we will only give you those if the whole path is clear for you, all the way from Visual Studio to the store. If you go and download things on your own, you have to be a little smart about what you're doing and what you're targeting. But if you stay within the bounds of Visual Studio setup and updates mechanisms, we will get you bits that will work broadly and will be fully supported end to end.
And so is it safe to say that Visual Studio is actually decoupled from the SDK so that I could change my project to target one and then the next and then go back to the original? And
That's
so I could experiment for a little bit and then I could reset it and even lean on the strong typing to, when I reset it, say, now go ahead and do a build and tell me what broke.
Yep.
What do I need to fix before I can target this old one? Wonderful.
Yeah, before you go and package and submit, we try and warn you ahead of time.
That's probably a good idea.
Yes.
We've already
me.
answered this one. Adriana's wondering, can I use Visual Studio Code to build UWP apps? And
Same question, yeah. Whether it's Islandwood or not, it's you need the Windows SDK that we were talking about, and so unfortunately, we cannot do that right now.
yeah, you imagine Visual Studio Code on these other platforms trying to create a UWP app, which really leans on the operating system.
Yeah, the only exception would be things like portable class libraries, which you have, let's say you design something for a cross-platform scenario. Let's say you're running some Linux code on some server, and it's the same code that's running on the client. Then you could consider using VS Code for those, shared code type of things. But you're right, for building the native head, for the lack of a better word, you do need Windows and Visual Studio.
You want to debug Cortana, you kind of need Cortana running there.
Kind of neat Cortana. Exactly. Now, I actually use Visual Studio Code for my editor to just edit text files or whatever, and the language support in it is phenomenal. There are really a lot of languages that are recognized, and so if I bring in a C# file, it's going to show me the color coding, and it's going to give me a little bit of help, but I'm not going to be able to build or execute.
Right.
Yeah. What happened to the Westminster Bridge discussed at Build?
That was already released at Visual Studio 2015 RTM. Ultimately, all it is you're packaging your manifest file, having enough metadata to sort of like package an existing website and sort of like, for the lack of a better word, render that inside a Universal Windows Platform app.
Okay.
So Project Westminster was one of the first things out there, and you can do that today.
Yeah, it's really awesome. I mean, it's you've got two ways of kind of doing it. You can go through Visual Studio, create the mockup, and really what a hosted web app is you create a manifest, basically an XML file, and you say, here's the website, here's some additional stuff I want to do, and at its simplest, you take that manifest, you package it up as an AppX, you send it up to the store. We also support through App Studio, which is, you can almost think of it as sort of Squarespace for app developers. You can go in, say I want to create a hosted web app, you enter in the URL, it creates the manifest for you, and you can generate it, run it locally, or submit it to the store. But then you can take that hosted website, that hosted web app, and you can evolve it, right? You can add more and more native functionality as you want to supplement or complement that hosted website that you can continue to change without submitting anything new to the store, and move it down the path closer and closer towards a Cordova app or a WinJS app, depending on how you want to think about it. And so the hosted web app provides a really nice way of getting people in the store, improving discoverability for their website, and even monetizing their websites using the payment instruments in the store, which is really kind of cool.
Kind of broadly distributing it in what feels to consumers like a new format. I'm used to going to the store to find my apps and all.
I mean, the web space is so dynamic and interesting. For Cordova, we just released about a month or so ago what we call hot code push, where you essentially can think of HTML and CSS and JavaScript as downloadable content into your web app. You can download that into your web app when network connectivity is available, and you certainly have evolved your app slightly. And it still is an offline installed experience without any server connectivity, but the moment you connect, you sort of have gotten an update, of the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript content.
And once that stuff's in there, like you're basically running your HTML and JS code that you know and love without a web browser window. When you go into Cortana and you type in your website or your app name, like it shows up, it's very easily discoverable. You can extend more and more of Windows. I think web notifications show up inside the Notification Center. Like it just really creates a very rich experience. And if it's a responsive web design, like it looks and behaves just like an app.
And I'm just going to anticipate the obvious question there. People are going to wonder, if this is coming from a website, should I assume that it's only like public JavaScript that's compatible with the browser, or am I going to be able to access my documents or my camera or something like that? In other words, do I have native access with that code that I'm pulling down off of a server?
I believe the answer is yes. I mean, you can write Cordova plugin style items.
Right, but you're still in the sandbox, right?
Yes, you're still in the sandbox.
As long as you're in the sandbox, you can do anything that, think about anything that the Edge browser can do.
Yeah,
in many
right.
ways,
And when you're on the Windows platform, it's extended by the fact that you can call in.
And like Cliff was saying, you of course have plugins if you go the Cordova route to sort of like, that's already wrapping up
Sure.
a lot of these common native APIs in a cross-platform way. So you can, from your JavaScript, it just looks like cross-platform code, but it ultimately boils down to the native implementation on each platform that it's running on.
And really, this just boils down to, in keeping with the theme, one more trajectory, one more way that if you're trying to target a Windows app and you already have something, you already have some web assets or some iOS app assets, whatever you already have, we're trying to create these trajectories into creating a Windows app.
Correct.
I would say it's the Windows promise. I mean, it used to be always the case of, can I run that on Windows? It's Windows. Of course you can, right?
Yeah.
And now it's just like, well, can I take my Objective-C and run that on Windows? Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah.
C++? Sure. OpenGL? Bring it.
on.
I mean, it's just, it's Windows.
Armando asks a good question that I think you'll be able to answer, Ryan. When will ARM support be added to iOS Bridge?
Yeah, so it's something that we are definitely looking into. As you can imagine, adding support for a new CPU type is not trivial. So I don't have a firm date for that, but definitely check back on GitHub. We'll be posting our roadmap here in the next few weeks. We'll have more blog posts, and we'll definitely announce when it's available, hopefully soon. It's something that we're working on for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Toby has a older Windows phone. Is Continuum going to be supported on his phone?
No, I believe it requires a device upgrade.
Okay.
Because it requires hardware capabilities like, I believe USB-C is the one that's
Right,
currently being
USB-C,
supported.
Sure.
So you do need, I'm not sure about Miracast support, if it's already there, it'll work or not, but I believe it does need newer hardware because you're kind of powering two displays at this point, right?
Yeah.
So,
Everything I've heard. I mean, I can't wait to get a 950
yeah.
XL. But it's sort of me.
How about this question? Brandon asks, will UWP apps support the Xbox One controller? Very specific.
absolutely. I mean, so first of all, we haven't, my team actually has Xbox support working internally, but we have nothing to share external to.
Great.
It's pretty nascent, and we'll hopefully, in the near future, share more of the roadmap there. But yeah, absolutely. Once Universal Windows apps come on the Xbox, which we've already said publicly, you will have native support for the controller. The controls themselves, like we said at the beginning of the conversation, will look great out of the box on the Xbox. And beyond that, it's your own user experience that you have to worry about.
And on that end, I mean, can you just take the Xbox controller and use it with the Windows PC?
Yeah,
with
that's the
UWP
promise
app?
of the Universal Windows platform, right? It's the same APIs available,
Yep.
and if that API happens to run on the PC, and you have an auxiliary display like an Xbox controller, sure.
Yeah.
So if Windows sees the controller, the UWP app can see the controller.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, when the same core is on all these different devices, then plugging in an input is just recognized as the same exact input.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about how there are all these trajectories into creating a Windows app, and then there are all these device families. Once you are a Windows app, whether you've gotten there because of your website or because of your iOS app, once you are a Windows app, you're lit up on a lot of different devices, and as that includes things like Xbox, now we're talking about screens of all kinds of sizes. Yeah. So does this change the day-to-day thinking of a developer? I feel like developers have been a bit siloed where they say, I target the desktop and maybe the tablet, or I target the phone. Well, now your developer all of a sudden is not just a developer for a certain screen size, right?
I think it's true. While the platform has the promise of consistent APIs that work across all these devices, and we will try to maintain as much consistency as possible, the form factors are slightly different, and each device has unique capabilities and APIs specific to the device that we want you to use because we want your app to work great on that particular device. That means you'll have to test on that device, and you'll have to make sure that you essentially are running bare metal on the device. Of course, we'll make it easy. We'll have emulators, and we'll make things possible in the cloud for you to do things. We'll help you, but ultimately, you better not ship an app without actually testing on the device that you're, going to ship on.
But you've also done 3 really cool things with that. One is baking UWP into the core, right? And so if the device is running Windows, it's running the Universal Windows platform, the core of it. That core set of 80, 90% of the APIs that are in there in that Universal device family piece. To the stuff you did with native.NET, just awesome, right? Because you can now, you could probably explain it better, but getting away from the just-in-time compiling to this ahead-of-time compiling?
Yeah, it does help devices where, for example, startup times can, for example, the IoT devices, they're pretty low end of the spectrum when it comes to raw CPU power.
Right, sure.
JIT is, for example, intensive in terms of battery and, so the work we've done with .NET is compile down C# to native code. So it's essentially a JIT-less environment. And
you don't have all the pound diffs anymore. Like from a productivity point of view, you don't have to worry about compiler flags and spitting out 5 packages. Like it's just one.
Yeah.
And if you didn't quite bound it, it's not going to crash when it goes into that same file.
Yeah. It depends upon how much you want to customize for the device. If you stay within the bounds of the Universal Windows platform, probably getting away with not much work. But then if you light up newer functionality, you'll have to test on the right device as well.
And then API contracts. I love API contracts. Right? I mean, the idea that instead of checking for when am I running on Windows, which version of Windows am I running on, well, what SKU, what device, you can basically say, is this API contract present, and check the Xbox chat. Right? And you're no longer saying, do I need to worry about if Bluetooth is on this device family or that device family? You just simply say, I need Bluetooth.
Right.
Is it there? Yes? All right, then do it. If not, you can degrade gracefully, and so you get into a degrade or light up scenario.
That's correct.
Rather than having to spend lots of time remembering which SKU, which package, all this other stuff. Like, it's phenomenal.
Well, and that's for the discovery of capabilities, but contracts are also good for communication between your app and other apps. Does anybody want to talk about app services?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we've done a lot of work to make it possible for what we call like web of apps, right? Where you want apps to sort of share rich data and the developer not have to do a lot of work for cross-process communication or app communication. We've done a lot of work in Windows 10 to enable the scenario where you can send data across app boundaries much more easily. We did take the first step with Windows 8 to do this. Windows 10 just makes it a lot more simpler in terms of sending data across apps.
But these are still protected, these channels of communication between one app and another. I mean, the reason for having the sandboxes is because I don't want this other app to be able to violate.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to inject and run malicious code in a different
Right.
app. You're just sending data over, and the other app hopefully processes the data in a reliable way, and does something with it.
Yeah, there's definite benefits for both developer and consumer. Because if I'm a consumer and I'm making a purchase, and I do an app-to-app communication call into PayPal, right? Then you can surface in that PayPal UI, you log in, you handle your financial information, and then you kick back out to the app. It passes data back, and so as a consumer, I'm not giving developer A my username and password and then hoping that they go ahead and do it. And of course, they won't keep it anywhere.
Yeah, right, of course. That's what they promised.
Yeah. And then for the developer, you get into it, you start leaving this world of having to remember, okay, what's the web service governance for who I'm calling in? And if I'm calling a playlist and music service X changes their playlist API, I don't need to worry about that because I just call into the app using a contract.
Yep.
They do what they need, they pass me back the data, and it's all good.
Yep, that's correct.
Trent's wondering how we know when or if to include the .NET Core or .NET. Like when we're working with a Windows 10 app in the UWP, we're targeting Windows Core, right? And what's the difference between that and .NET Core? And
So .NET Core is, for the lack of a better word, like we've taken the most common libraries that we think most people would want and packaged that together as a single NuGet package that you add, so you don't have to go compose your application.
Yeah.
Now, if you do find a blocking issue or we fix something that you really want, an improvement that we make, you can choose to sort of get out of that box of packages and include something that's on top, local to your application. So the .NET Core meta package, as we call it, is just designed to sort of give you a solid set of good APIs that you want to use across all of these device families. And for the most part, you probably want to stay in that bounds. Honestly, like it's in many ways our version of the One Core platform, right? It's the .NET version of that, where we want to give you consistent behavior across all these device families that are running that .NET code.
I think we've got time for one more. Let's go ahead and ask an iOS Bridge question. The question is, does iOS Bridge support storyboards?
It does, actually. So as of recently, we did a ton of work. We pushed it up to GitHub, I think either last week or the week before. So we support storyboards and we support auto layout. So two really very important features for iOS developers. It's been pushed really heavily in the past couple of years. So yeah, we're very happy to have that in there now.
Excellent.
And
Okay,
we'll continue to add on to it as well.
and all transparent through GitHub.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. And on that topic, let's give people send them off with some endpoints if they want to get involved in Windows packaging or Windows development. You mentioned the dev.windows.com. Is that the best place for them to visit?
Dev.windows.com, it'll get you the SDK, it'll get you docs, everything else. If you're interested in bringing code to Windows, dev.windows.com/bridges. We just refreshed that yesterday, has a really cool kind of Mad Libs kind of thing, where you can say like, oh, I'm interested in bringing my code to Windows and I use Objective-C or I use Java, and then it walks you through and then gives you recommendations as to what bridge might benefit. And then otherwise, I'd say two other places. One would be the Building Apps blog, so that's blogs.windows.com, building apps. And then on Twitter, @WindowsDev.
Okay. Wonderful. And the second one that he mentioned is also where they would submit their IPAs. Is that right?
Yeah. So and then also check out GitHub. WinOBJC is the open source project that we have there. So contribute, make comments, submit issues. Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to throw out there before we close?
The new SDK is coming out in the near future.
Okay.
As is Visual Studio 2015 Update 1. We want people to try these things, build some amazing apps, but more importantly, give us your feedback. Tell us what APIs are there, what's missing, what would you like to see, both in terms of .NET or Windows APIs, what device families, how things are working out, and we'd love to hear your feedback more than anything else.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for bringing your bright minds to this panel, and thank you, audience, for joining us this day 2 of Connect, talking about building Windows UWP apps.